Hi, welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Rosie Murphy.
And I'm Sammy Roth. This is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
We have finally reached Season 1, Episode 19, Deus Ex Machina.
It is a fabulous episode, just some of my favorite personal moments from the show in here, and I just can't wait to talk about it.
We're going to dive right in. As always, we open the episode with hot takes, gut reactions, fiery hot thoughts on the episode. Sammy, I understand that you have several things that you want to discuss.
I have two hot takes. How about I do one, then you do one, then I do another one?
That sounds good.
Okay. I guess I'll start with the one that's about why I don't like Jack, which is always my favorite thing to do, which is that, so the scene where, I know this is supposed to be funny, but the scene where he's like joking with Sawyer about how he has STDs in front of Kate, what the fuck? That's a total. And then later he says, "Oh, doctor-patient confidentiality, haha." But it's totally a violation of that. It's a horrible thing to do for him as a doctor. And it just, I know that Sawyer's a jerk and maybe he deserved it, but it really got me worked up that Jack would joke about a thing like that. I was bothered.
I mean, no, it's a dick move, but I think Jack saw it as warranted. And I think he knew early on that Sawyer just needed glasses and took it as an opportunity to mess with him. And
Jack took the Hippocratic Oath. He's the only doctor on this island. He should act like it.
I mean, I know you're right. Like, if they were in a clinic, that would be highly inappropriate.
I do feel like a little bit of a spoiled sport.
Yeah, like he was just trying to give Sawyer a taste of his own medicine, so to speak. I don't know. I'm okay with it.
Well, what's your hot take?
So something I did not know until I was reading, I watched the episode, then I read Lostpedia, and then I watched it again because I did not know that Boone contacted the other survivors from up in the plane.
Really?
No, I've never known that before. That's nuts because it happens. You have to watch quite closely for it because Boone, the plane is starting to fall right as you hear the other side say, we're the survivors of Oceanic 815. And you can't really hear it unless you're listening for it and you know it's there, and I've never known it was there before.
It's so
hard
to hear.
I feel like is an incredible oversight on my part, and I apologize to the listeners, but holy crap.
No, I actually made a note when I was watching it that it's so hard to hear that you almost have to either go back and watch it a second time or like go read about it somewhere else.
Yeah.
Like, I knew about it, but I'm sure I didn't catch it myself the first time I watched this episode.
I regret not knowing about that sooner. I'm glad I know about it now.
Okay.
Before we get back to you, let me play a hot take from a listener.
Yes, good.
Hi, Sammy and Rosie. This is your friend Jill. I've been listening to your podcast, and it got me into watching Lost again, I'm proud to say. And I noticed something interesting that I wanted to share. So in episode 19... Locke and Boone are basically trying to find the plane that Locke sees in his vision, and they're trying to get to the plane, and Locke starts having real physical difficulties getting there. He can't really walk. Boone doesn't know what's going on. He keeps saying, let's go back, you can't do this, let's go back, there's no point, it's a waste. And eventually Locke just looks at him and yells, don't tell me what I can't do. And it's exactly the same language that we see appear in the next episode. After Boone falls with the plane off of that cliff, and Jack is trying to fix him and make him better, and he's kind of devolving into this mess where he's trying really hard to fix Boone no matter what it takes. At one point, Sun says to him, you can't do this. You can't fix him. And he says, don't tell me what I can't do. And that struck me as really interesting because we're seeing parallels in these two characters while at the same time we've already seen that there's some conflict between them, and we'll continue to see, especially with the plot line of the Hatch developing, that there's more conflict between these characters later on. But they do have something in common, and I think this kind of shows that pretty clearly. Anyway, so that's my hot take, and that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I had totally forgotten that Jack is going to use that "don't tell me what I can't do" language that we so much associate with Locke. It's almost like his catchphrase. That's interesting to think about that parallel because I hadn't.
Yeah, and we've seen Locke say this several times already, and you're right, it's already kind of become his thing, especially related to his physical disability. But yeah, I forgot about how Jack appropriates it in the next episode, and it's we should really save this for next week. But what's so interesting about that part to me is that that's when Jack has to do this for Boone because Locke has basically abdicated responsibility. And Jack sort of takes on some of the Locke persona. We can get into that next week. I will be looking for those parallels for sure.
Yeah, I mean, without getting too far ahead, I think it definitely speaks to the innate stubbornness that both of them have.
Which is why it's so interesting to see Jack actually joking around in this episode, inappropriate though it might be.
Yes.
You said you had one final hot take?
Oh, I did. And this just, it's about Locke, so we should probably get into Locke. But
That'll be a good segue.
I was taking notes of this episode of, like, all of the, like, really obscure and random things that Locke knows, just, like, off the top of his head.
Yeah.
And he recognizes Nigerian money. He knows how to build a trebuchet.
Yeah.
and he knows how long it takes polyester to decompose.
Yeah.
I'm just like, how do you know all that shit before Wikipedia?
Well, and
That's what I'm wondering.
valid point. And later on, when they find the Black Rock at the end of this season, he's able to say something like, oh, it's a slave ship. It's probably from this century, and it probably set sail from Madagascar or the east coast of Africa. Like, ridiculously specific.
Yeah.
But yeah, the breadth of his knowledge is almost like borderline unbelievable.
Yeah. And I think it's intentional, and I think we're supposed to be, like, kind of in awe of Locke as a jack of all trades, but yeah, a little bit unbelievable. I agree.
Yeah.
So John Locke, huh?
Wow. Yeah.
It's like, where do you even begin with an episode like this? This is a seminal episode of Lost.
I want to start with Locke's vision, and I have a couple of questions about it. So let's go through what he sees. He sees the plane, which is real, and it's real in the present moment, right? They actually uncover the plane. It's on the island.
Right, well, it got there, I think, at some point earlier than that.
Yes, but it exists in the present time. He sees his mother sort of pointing the way, which does not exist on the island. That's purely in his head. He sees Boone covered in blood at the site of the plane, which does happen in the future. He does end up covered in blood in relation to the plane, but not explicitly. And then he hears this: Teresa falls up the stairs.
Teresa falls up the stairs. Teresa falls down the stairs. Teresa falls up the stairs. Teresa falls down the stairs. Teresa
Which
falls
is
up the stairs.
something that really happened in the past, but which Locke would have no way of knowing. My primary question is, like, is the vision of Boone covered in blood prophetic? Like, is he foreseeing Boone's death? And should he know that he's foreseeing Boone's death? Does he differentiate at all between what's real and what's not in this vision? Because he knows, or he's guided by this belief that the plane is actually there, but he never stops to wonder if his mother's actually there. So he clearly has some sense of... Anyway, I'm rambling. My primary question is, does he foresee Boone's death? And if so, why doesn't he say anything? Does he even think about that? Does he think at that time that Boone was a sacrifice the island demanded, like he says later?
That's so interesting. It didn't even occur to me that Boone covered in blood in that vision was a harbinger. But you're right. It totally is. No, I didn't think about it.
Yeah.
Probably because I was distracted by all of the stuff in that dream that didn't seem real.
Right.
Like Locke's mother pointing the way.
Right. In that fur coat.
Yeah. Totally inappropriate island wear.
I would argue that he does foresee at least Boone being injured.
Yeah, I'm thinking now about the moment where when they get to the plane and Locke's legs start failing him, he just immediately says to Boone, you're going to need to go up there.
Right.
As if... And the fact also that his legs fail him here, I was thinking about a lot. Almost as if... I mean, this is a little bit of a tangent to what you're saying, but I think it's a related point, that it was almost as if, if Boone truly was a sacrifice that the island demanded, whether or not Locke knows that his legs going out here are, Jacob and or the island saving him and making sure that Boone's the one who goes up there and not him.
Oh, I've never framed it that way.
I thought also, just by the way, of the moment where we finally see, at the end of season 5, where Locke falls out the building and hurts his leg, that it's then Jacob that goes and heals him.
Oh,
so I was thinking, if
you're
Jacob
right.
heals him, Jacob probably has got the ability to unheal him, at least temporarily.
Whoa.
Ooh.
What you're implying here with this idea about Jacob is that Jacob is like threatening to take away Locke's miracle, right? Like he's saying, I gave this to you and I can take it back. Do you think that's what's happening here?
Well, I guess I was reading it as just a little bit more of a literal, like, Jacob needs to make sure that Locke isn't the one climbing up that hill and falling in the plane. Because it's Boone that's the one who's supposed to die, and Locke needs to live and do other things. But yeah, I do think
Doesn't Locke say, like, the island gave this to me and now it's trying to take it back?
The plane, our plane, I was in that chair when we took off, but not after we crashed.
Why were you in a wheelchair?
Doesn't matter anymore. But this island, it changed me. It made me whole. Now it's trying to take it back, and I don't know why.
So yes, I think that is also a good reading, that implicit here is a threat that if you don't, do my bidding.
If you don't do, like, yeah.
That's a good point.
Which is crazy. Like, think about the implications of that. Like, I gave you your ability to walk back, which was so much, I mean, all we know about Locke's life before the island here is that he was routinely humiliated because he was in the wheelchair, right? And like the island, quote unquote, or Jacob or whoever, gave him back not only his ability to walk, but his ability to do all these things that everyone had been telling him he couldn't do, and threatening to take that away. I mean, my God, that's one way to force somebody to do your will, right? And to force them to go to great lengths that they might not otherwise go to.
Well, it's interesting that Locke doesn't seem to see it as malicious at all. He is even, more devoted at the end of this.
Right, but that makes the faith a little less blind, I think. Because he's seen, like he hasn't just received good things, he's also received the threat of bad things. Which is somehow different, and I'm not sure how.
Yeah. Well, at the end, when he says, "Why are you doing this to me?" that does make it seem like he thinks he's being tested. It seems like he definitely thinks the island is, throwing these bad things at him, like, whether he's referring specifically to Boone's death or his legs going out or both or all of the above. Like, right. He's thinking, the island, even he's Job in this situation, right?
Yeah, or he sees himself that way.
And then I love that he thinks the light going on in the hatch is
a great sign.
It's Desmond wondering what's going on up there.
Right, which of course we'll find out soon.
Yeah. But anyway, okay. It does seem like he must subconsciously have some sense that there's something going on here with Boone.
Yeah, because he's insistent that he needs Boone. Like, after he has this vision, he goes and wakes Boone up and says, "Hey, we need to go."
It almost feels like this is what he's been grooming Boone for this whole time.
Yeah.
For the moment when Locke says to him, "You've got to climb up that dangerous cliff and go into the plane perched on the edge of it," Boone just does it.
Yeah. Yeah, and even throughout this episode, Boone is reluctant and he's saying, "Let's go back," and Locke sort of slowly reveals himself to Boone as this powerful figure.
Yeah.
Like, he tells him about his vision. He asks, "Who's Teresa?" And Boone says, "No, there must be another explanation. I must have mentioned her in the jungle." And, Locke is able to prove to him that he actually had this vision. And then later he tells Boone about his miracle. He tells him that he was in the wheelchair and he was healed. And I believe that's the first person he's told.
I was thinking the same thing. It's the first
which
time.
is fitting because Boone is sort of his disciple or his convert. But it's hard not to see this as Locke strategically revealing information about his own power in order to convince Boone to go along with his plan.
That's totally how I read it. And in fact, I found myself wondering before that point in the episode, forgetting that Locke was going to tell Boone about that he was in a wheelchair, wondering, gee, why hasn't Locke told anyone about that yet? Because if he's trying to convince people that the island is magic and they're all there for a reason, that would be such a convincing element. But it's in this context that we're talking about, it almost seems like that was his trump card, his ace in the hole that he was saving for this moment when he really, really needed Boone to keep going along
because
with him.
he's not actively trying to convince people of the island's power yet. It's something that he's developing privately, and he needs to convince Boone in order to open the hatch and all this other stuff. But I don't know that he's actively trying to convince other people that that's the case.
Well, he says to Jack,
Oh, yeah.
what was it, in White Rabbit, I'm forgetting the exact wording, but, you were
Right.
brought here for a reason.
And Jack says, brought here, and
But-
it becomes one of those, yeah.
I mean, I know we've been having this conversation about Locke all season, and with Locke and Boone all season, and sort of becoming a little bit, I think both of us, at least me, becoming more
Yeah.
skeptical about Locke. Perhaps
Me
you
too.
were already skeptical. But there's a lot going on with cons in this episode, especially with the flashback with Locke's dad this episode. It's hard for me not to view this now as Locke conning Boone in a way. But this whole time, building up to Boone, that they found the hatch for a reason, they're supposed to open it. They have to stop hunting boar for everyone else. Boone has to let go of whatever other personal struggles that he has, so that he can focus on being in the jungle with Locke, helping him open the hatch. And even if he hasn't done it at this point, as you mentioned, ultimately Locke justifies this as part of his greater destiny and says Boone was a sacrifice that the island demanded. So perhaps Locke is being directed or thinks he's being directed, but it seems to me like Boone has been conned.
I think the key difference is that Locke actually believes this. And it does seem here like he had some sense, or he should have had some sense, that this could result in Boone's injury or death. But there is like a purity of intention there. Yeah. That's what makes it different from an outright con, right? Which is when you're misleading someone. Like Locke doesn't think he's misleading; he thinks he's leading.
No, I think you're right. And the other angle to this that I wanted to bring in is that if Locke is pure of heart, I think there's a case to be made watching the show as a whole that he is being conned by the island, in a way, or by Jacob.
Oh, that's very interesting.
And that's like a much bigger question, but I watch all of Locke's stories now, and I watch him talk about his faith in the island and his destiny, and always just think back to the fact that ultimately what happens is he dies, and
Locke is almost being used in the same way he's using Boone.
Yeah, yes.
Right? Like he gets this one miracle, and then he gets several other sort of small revelations, right? He gets a vision or two. He has that confrontation with the monster. He finds the hatch, which he takes as a sign.
And then the light goes on, although we know it's Desmond.
Right. But he, too, is getting all of these like small parcels of information from the island that are encouraging, that are sort of fueling his faith. And he's doing the same thing to Boone. Although, of course, ultimately, you could make the argument that, in fact, Locke was a sacrifice that the island demanded.
I was going to go there.
Yeah. When he dies as Jeremy Bentham, in order to bring the group back to the island, which is basically Jacob's will.
Yeah.
But then he's also used, his body is inhabited by the Man in Black, which is
A cruel irony.
a cruel irony and arguably also the will of the island. Like, the Man in Black has a claim to the island's power, too.
So have we decided that Locke's destiny was just to be a pawn, and that Boone's destiny was just to be the pawn of a pawn? I feel like some of our listeners are going to be so upset about this conversation. It does feel a little sacrilegious to be talking about Locke like this.
Well, so maybe you're right that this goes against sort of the lore of the show, but who is Locke supposed to be? I mean, is he supposed to be the prophet of the island, or is he supposed to be the leader who, dies diminutively and it's a noble sacrifice, or is he Jacob's pawn, or is he all of the above? I mean, it's certainly possible for him to be all the above.
Right. To what extent can we mere mortals truly be heroes in a universe dominated by the good and evil forces controlling all the pieces? Can we pause and talk about Boone for like 1 second?
Absolutely.
The conversation we've been having about Boone all season is basically about him like being Locke's disciple or doing Locke's bidding, and the last bit of Boone that we get here is not just Boone doing Locke's bidding, but also this really weird story about Boone being like a spoiled rich kid yelling for his nanny to come up the stairs. I would like to, think that there's something good deep within Boone that we're supposed to, like, feel really bad about when he dies. But it seems like the last little bit we get about him is just another anecdote about how he's a spoiled rich kid. And I don't know, it's a little unsatisfying, and I wonder if there's something else there that we're supposed to take from Boone's death about him.
So my read on Boone is that Locke is providing him a purpose like none which he's ever had before. I mean, he is quite young, right? He's like 23, 24. He's run his mother's company, which he doesn't seem to particularly care about.
Right.
He's cared about protecting Shannon, and that's been sort of his guiding light pre-Island. But now Locke is offering him a chance to do something real, right? Like, Locke is insisting, like, we are uncovering secrets. We are finding a purpose. We are going to not only save the group, but also, offer them enlightenment or whatever waits for us in the hatch. And no one's ever offered Boone that before, right? No one's ever taken him seriously. Even though he was running a company, it was sort of described as being quite frivolous, right? It was like a wedding planning
Yeah, I
company.
think so. It's so frivolous I'd forgotten that.
Like, no one's ever offered him the chance to do something like this. And I think what we see in Boone in the one or two flashbacks we get is that as he got older, he didn't want to be such a spoiled rich kid anymore, right? Like, he really was interested in, like, discovering a purpose or doing something.
Yeah.
Because that's in part what he shames Shannon for, right? Like, he describes her as being useless and
Right.
unhelpful and having no skills. And arguably that comes from a place of insecurity where he recognizes that he also is kind of useless and he desperately wants to make himself useful, and Locke is offering him the chance. The question this leads to for me is, like, how responsible is Boone for his own choices here? Like, I don't think it's fair to Boone to say he was a patsy and Locke used him and Locke led him astray and then he died and it's all Locke's fault. Like, he's a grown man. He has free will. He tried to say, he had his wits about him enough to say, hey, we should go back. It's not fair of us to say, like, Boone had no clue what he was doing. But I think it's easy to understand why he was the person who ended up going with Locke. It's a bit the blind leading a blind, this relationship between
I like
Locke
that.
and Boone, and he chose, in an act of faith, really, to put his faith in Locke and to follow him. And in the end, that led him to a horrific injury and ultimately his death. Point being, like, I think Boone has more agency than I give him credit for a lot of the time.
I agree. I think Boone and Locke can share in the blame for his death. And Jacob.
Jacob, I like your idea about Jacob somewhere being responsible for Locke's sudden recurrent paralysis. I think that makes a lot of sense.
It does. When you said the thing about the blind leading the blind, it just, I'll pull way, way, way back here, but just it made me think, like, if the blind is leading the blind, is it the blind leading the blind leading the blind? I mean, what does Jacob even know at the end of the day? He knows what his mother told him, that if he didn't contain the evil on the island, that the world would end. But who the hell knows? I still don't think, at the end of the show, you really know the answer to that.
No, I don't think you do either. Anyway, jumping back to that final scene.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Why does Locke lie here? Jack says, tell me exactly what happened, setting up, of course, that Locke is not going to tell him exactly what happened.
I think because Locke
And he
doesn't want
says
to
he
take
fell off a cliff.
responsibility, right?
Yes, and I understand that Locke is probably not thinking clearly because, Boone is in very bad shape, but, like, wouldn't have been that hard to say we were out hunting boar and we found this plane, and Locke, or Boone climbed up to the plane and the plane fell, and that way he could still give Jack accurate medical information. But I think he believes that the plane is part of this whole secret that only he's supposed to know.
Right, he hasn't told anyone about the hatch either, I don't think, besides Boone.
No, not at this point.
Yeah.
So he can't even share the existence of this plane, or he doesn't feel like he can within his own belief system,
Yeah.
which...
I think it's just sort of a gut instinct that he knows he did something wrong here, and rather than go anywhere near it, he just wants to come up with something completely different.
Yeah.
But what this is making me think about is the fact that he then, I mean, to me, it's the moment where he runs off, right? And he runs off and he goes
Yeah,
to the
he
hatch.
vanishes.
And I mean, the moment, by the way, where he's banging on the hatch and screaming and...
I've done everything you wanted me to do. So why did you do this to me?
That's one of my favorite moments in the whole show. I love that. And Terry O'Quinn is so good in that moment.
He's, yeah.
Brilliant. But I think the fact that he just thinking about this out loud now, the fact that he bails and immediately as Boone is like lying there dying, runs off to like yell and scream at the hatch about his destiny, I think that, to the point that you made earlier, whether or not he knew Boone was going to die or was going to have to sacrifice himself, it doesn't mean that much to him. I mean, I think that, in fact, that probably, that makes me believe even more that he, may have known something was going to happen. Just the fact that he just doesn't seem to give that much of a shit about it at the end. He cares much more about what this means for him and his destiny.
Right, because what he's shouting is not, why did you take Boone? Right? It's...
Why are you doing this to me?
Yeah.
And he puts a little extra emphasis on, to me!
Yeah, we'll have to keep an eye out for whether Locke actually feels guilty.
He says with such conviction in the finale, Boone was a sacrifice that the island demanded. And he believes it so hard.
Yeah. Which is, and where does that leave Locke's developing belief system if the island is demanding personal sacrifices, right? Like, it certainly tests, but demands like human sacrifices? I don't know. This is a strange element of Locke's belief system, and it doesn't seem like a rationalization. It seems like something he really thinks is real.
Well, in that case, then Locke probably has it coming from him that he's going to be a human sacrifice too. Sorry, that was super dark. I feel like this whole thing has been hindsight.
Yeah, I don't have anything separate and distinct, no. We don't have an interview this week, regrettably, but we have several more booked up for the last few episodes of this season and are really, really getting excited to share those with you.
Yeah, and the week after next, we're watching The Greater Good. We'll have some more from the writer Leonard Dick, who wrote that episode. We'll have an interview coming up after that with Michael Beauvois, whose last name I may have just butchered, but he was the lead cinematographer for the first season and talked a lot about some of the really epic scenes that he filmed, like the raft departure at the end of season 1. And then we'll close out the year with Exodus parts 2 and 3, and we're talking to MC Gainey, who played Tom Friendly, who was really, really
We're
fun.
gonna have to take the boy.
Oh, he talks about that line, and he's so much fun, and it was great to talk to him. So you'll definitely want to stick around and hear that.
So if you are watching season 1 with us, and we certainly hope that you are, please call us and share your hot take. We are at 9546 Dharma on the phone, or you can record yourself and just send it as a message to our Facebook page. If you have thoughts about Locke, Boone, culpability, Charlie, Jack, Sawyer, whether Jack violated his Hippocratic oath when asking Sawyer about his sexual history, anything about any episode of Lost at all, we would love to hear it because we love talking about Lost. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/thehatchpodcast.
Yes, we're also on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast. Please rate and review us on iTunes. We love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show.
Our cover art is by Danny Roth. Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen.
Namaste.